It's fall in Chicago, late afternoon. The air is full of the smells of street food, the rustle of fallen leaves, and the sounds of the bustle of the big city. People hurriedly pass by shop windows, as if not noticing each other. Donald Trump is walking down the sidewalk in a long black coat and a bright red tie. After a business meeting, he decided to walk to get a feel for the city. His gaze suddenly clings to something unusual. Against the wall of a closed store, a woman sits on a dirty cardboard table. Her shoulders are covered by an old army cloak, ragged with time. Nearby lies a homemade cardboard sign, "I am a veteran. Please help." Her appearance stands out starkly against the businesslike pace of the street. Trump stops briefly. He observes the woman, noticing the little things: the worn boots, the strained hands, the army badge around her neck. Her gaze, lowered to the ground, seems tired and indifferent. Passers-by turn around, noticing that Trump is the one standing next to the homeless woman. Some freeze, taking pictures. Others continue walking, casting curious glances along the way. Trump takes a step forward, leans a little closer so as not to startle her, and asks calmly but with firmness in his voice, "What is your name, ma'am?" The woman lifts her head. Her face is covered with a fine network of wrinkles, but her eyes sparkle with challenge despite her fatigue. She answers with noticeable sarcasm, "Teresa Hensley. Why do you care?" Trump pauses, ignoring her abruptness, and adds, "I just want to understand why a veteran ended up here." Teresa looks at him, squinting her eyes, but says nothing. Her silence speaks more of disbelief than a desire to end the conversation. Donald Trump straightens up, looking at the woman in front of him. Her face, wrinkled and darkened from being outdoors for so long, retained an unusual expression, a mixture of pride and weariness. She clearly didn't want to arouse pity. "I see you're not one to give up," Trump said, folding his arms in front of him. Teresa grinned, but her eyes remained serious. 12 years in the military. 12 years I never gave up." Trump nodded, inviting her to continue. "I was in Afghanistan," she began, adjusting the badge around her neck. "Everyone in my platoon knew that if you were under fire, you had a chance. Because I'm going to get you out." Her voice shook, but not from weakness. It sounded firm, like she was remembering something significant. Teresa's memories come alive. She is seen in full gear, crawling across the sandy ground under a barrage of fire. Shells explode around her. The ground shakes. She pulls a wounded comrade to cover, and her face remains focused, despite the danger. "One time, I pulled a guy right out from under bullets. No one thought he would survive. But he does. He's alive. He's got a family. And me?" Teresa stands in her dress uniform in front of the line. She's being presented with the Medal of Honor. The camera captures her face, full of pride and embarrassment. One of her colleagues claps her on the shoulder, but there's a look of weariness in her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to come home after all this? You think life will be easier now, that someone will appreciate it, but instead no one wants you." Teresa opens the door to her apartment. It's empty inside. Old wallpaper, a broken couch, a stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table. She takes off her army boots, looks at the medal she puts on the shelf. Her face is blank, as if the medal no longer means anything. "I lost my job after a few months. No one wants veterans who can't run the offense anymore." Trump listened silently, frowning his eyebrows. "And no one helped?" he finally asked. "We're expendable to the system," she said, raising a sharp look at him. "If you don't know how to get through, they just throw you out." A middle-aged man walked by, looking over his shoulder at them. "It's her own fault," he said. "There's plenty of those around here." Trump turned to him, not hiding his irritation. "Try to go her way before you judge," he replied, glaring coldly at the man. Teresa grinned, for the first time with real relief. "You know, Maybe you're not what I thought you were. Donald Trump, after listening to Teresa's story, paused. His face read a mixture of sympathy and determination. He straightened slightly, as if making an important decision. "Madam," he began, looking her straight in the eye, "I can help you. This is no place for someone who has given so much to his country." Teresa raised her head, squinting. Her gaze was incredulous, as if she had heard those words a dozen times. "Help?" she asked with a chuckle. "How? Find me a temporary place to stay? Give me money for a couple days? And then what? I'll end up back here again." Trump kept his gaze on her. "It's temporary," he admitted. "But we'll start there. I'll arrange housing, medical care. It'll help you recover." Teresa leaned back against the wall and shook her head. "You just want to look good. I've seen people like you. Big words, nice gestures, press photos, and then silence." Her words sounded harsh, almost hurtful, but Trump remained calm. "This is not a show," he replied firmly. "I do not promise to fix the whole world, but I can start with one person." She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to see if he was sincere. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "Because I can," Trump said, "and because you deserve it." Teresa sighed, lowering her gaze to her worn shoes. "I'm tired of empty words," she said quietly. "I don't want to believe again and then end up with nothing." "Then let's start small," Trump suggested. He nodded toward the nearest cafe. "Lunch? We can talk about what to do next." She was silent for a long moment, as if weighing everything, before she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just no promises you can't keep." Trump smiled slightly and took a step towards the cafe, gesturing for her to follow him. "Let's eat first, then we'll deal with it later." Teresa rose to her feet, supporting herself with her hand against the wall. Her movements were slow, but her gaze became a little softer. She followed him cautiously, still wary, but with a drop of hope glimmering in her tired eyes. The cafe on the corner was small, with a cozy atmosphere. Old wooden tables, the smell of fresh coffee and quiet music in the background. Trump gestured Teresa to a vacant table in the corner, away from the stares of the customers. She sat down slowly, as if still considering whether she was doing the right thing. The waitress approached with a smile, but stopped for a second when she noticed Teresa. Her ragged appearance contrasted sharply with the sophisticated style of the other customers. "No need for a menu," Trump said briefly, noticing the pause. "Hot soup, bread, tea, and coffee." The waitress nodded and hurried away. Teresa leaned toward the table, wrapping her arms lightly around it. "This is strange," she muttered. "What is?" Trump looked at her intently. "Sitting here, among ordinary people, drinking hot tea, haven't done anything like that in a long time." Trump didn't answer, giving her the opportunity to continue on her own. She looked up, took a deep breath, and began to speak as if she couldn't hold it in any longer. "I tried," she began, but she stammered. "After I lost my place, I went to charitable organizations. And you know what? There's so much paperwork to fill out, you could die while they put you on the list." She smiled bitterly. "You go there, and they look at you like you're just another problem better avoided. Oh, there's no room, or oh, try again in a month, like I can wait when I don't even have food." Trump nodded, listening intently. "And then you realize no one wants you. It's just a statistic. And if you don't have connections, if you don't know how to get by, you're left with nothing." Her voice shook, but determination and anger burned in her eyes. Trump pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke briefly. "Margaret, I need you to contact the major charities that help veterans. Find the ones that can work fast. Make sure they really do their job." He hung up the phone, and looked at Teresa. "We'll start there," he said firmly, "and then we'll see how to improve the system from there." Teresa shook her head. "You make it sound like it's easy." "It's not easy," he admitted, "but if you do nothing, nothing will change." The waitress returned with the order: a bowl of hot chicken soup, fresh bread, a cup of tea and coffee. "Here," she said, putting everything on the table. Then she hesitated a moment and added, "If you want, I can get you something else. We have a great apple pie." Teresa raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Of course," the waitress replied with a smile. "You deserve the best." Teresa was silent for a moment, and then she said quietly, "Thank you." Trump, noticing this moment, gave the waitress a large tip, nodding slightly in appreciation. The soup was hot and hearty, and the coffee burned her tongue. Teresa ate slowly, as if she were relearning to enjoy a normal meal. A silence hung between them, but it was quiet. On the way out of the cafe, she stopped for a second, looked at Trump and said, "Maybe you really are different." Teresa sat on the edge of the bed in a small but cozy room. Her temporary living quarters were simple but comfortable. Clean walls, a new bed, a small table with a lamp. On the floor were 2 boxes of basic food and clothing provided by a charity organization that Trump's team had contacted. She slowly ran her hand over the bedspread, as if checking to see if it would all disappear in the next moment. There was a quiet hum through the open door. The staff at the charity center were chatting with the other residents. This place, albeit temporary, made her feel safe for the first time in a long time. The next day, Teresa sat in the doctor's office. A man in a white coat examined her carefully, making notes. "Your condition requires attention, but nothing irreparable," he said with a slight smile. "We'll start with vitamins, diet, and weight restoration. Then we'll think about how to improve your physical fitness." Teresa only nodded, still not used to someone taking care of her. Later, she met with a counselor who discussed with her possible work options and rehabilitation programs for veterans. "You have a lot of experience, Teresa," the female counselor said. "We can help you find a use for your skills." That evening, a black car pulled up outside the center. Teresa, already used to small steps of change, was surprised to see Trump get out of the car. He approached her, holding an envelope. "This is for you," he said, holding out the envelope to her. Teresa opened it and saw the check. The amount was enough to cover several months' worth of expenses up front. She looked at it and then lowered her gaze, struggling to hold back tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "This is the beginning," Trump replied. "The rest is up to you." Teresa clutched the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know anyone could do this for me." "Know this," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You have the power to change your life. Use it." When Trump left, Teresa stood at the entrance for a long time, holding the check in her hands. She looked at the road where his car had disappeared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt not fear, but hope. Her life had changed, but most importantly, her faith in herself had changed. A month passed. Warm sunlight streamed through the windows of the small office of the Veterans Assistance Center. The space was cozy but busy. Applications were being discussed on the phone, employees were helping visitors fill out paperwork, and someone in the corner was quietly drinking coffee, waiting their turn. In the midst of this traffic, at a modest table, sat Teresa. Her face no longer had its former tension and fatigue. She looked focused, confident, and slightly tired from the work that seemed to inspire her. An older man, ex-military, sat in front of her, holding a thin folder of documents. "It's so complicated," he said, spreading his hands. "These forms, I just don't understand how to deal with them. Teresa took the folder from him with a soft smile. Let's figure it out together, she said. I know what it's like when it feels like the bureaucracy is against you. She deftly went through the pages, explaining where and what to put. The man looked at her gratefully, his hands no longer trembling. It's done, Teresa finally said, handing the documents back to him. Thank you, he replied, rising. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You deserve more than help, she added. We are always here if you need anything. When the man left, one of the center's employees, a tall young man with glasses, came to her desk. He sat down across from her, pointing to the stack of paperwork Teresa had already managed to process. You're doing a great job, he said, but honestly, do you really believe you can change the system? Teresa looked up at him. A warm smile lit up her face, but there was a hard determination in her eyes. If someone did it for me, she said, pausing briefly, I can do it for others. The young man smiled back, as if the words made him look at his work differently.